Doroteha darchei noam, v'chol netivoteha shalom. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all of his paths are paths of peace. For me, God is a God of love. With all of the questions of theodicy, for me, and here I speak very from a personal perspective, God is a God of love. And a God of love cares about his creations, and therefore commands. Martin Buber says, the reason I reject the law is it's too restrictive. A God of love doesn't command in this way. I respectfully disagree. I think Dafka, a God of love, commands. Not coincidentally, the three basic rituals, Shabbat, Kashrut, and Tarat HaMishpacha, the Sabbath and the dietary laws and family purity, parallel the three most basic human drives: power, eating, and sex. As the goal of the halacha is to show how each of these drives, how life itself can be sanctified. Here, ethical monotheism parts from ethical humanism. Ethical humanism is a system of ethics which is derived. Do you want some water? Sure. Maybe someone can bring in some water. Now, I got problems. I'm ready to go. Ethical humanism is a system of ethics which is derived from the human being. From the human being. If it's derived from the human being, where is it derived from? From the human mind. From human reason. But human reason is relative. Freud is quoted to have once said, I love this, I couldn't find it anywhere, but it's a good quote if it's true. When it comes to self-deception, human beings are geniuses. In fact, we're so accustomed to trying to declare what is wrong to be right that we have a special word for it. And that word is rationalization. Ethical monotheism is very, very different. At its base, ethical monotheism comes from God. That's what it says. It's ethical, but at its base, at its foundation, it comes from Hashem. Its foundation is inviolate, immutable. That's why the pasuk says, "Hitalech lefanai," walk before me. The pasuk says, "V'shamru derech Hashem," to observe to God the paths of the Lord. Our goal is to find meaning in the law. Our goal is to find the ethics in the law. As the pasuk says, "V'yei tamim," become whole, lasot tzedakah u'mishpat, to do righteous and justice. That's our goal. But ethical monotheism would say that even if I can't find that meaning, even if I can't find that tnimut, even if I can't find that tzedakah u'mishpat, I still submit. I still submit. The mission of bringing ethical monotheism into the world is more or less shared across the Jewish religious spectrum. That's a heavy, broad statement because there are, of course, gradations and variations. But I think, by and large, the Reform and the conservative movements, I think more or less, they would agree that that's what the mission of Yadut is about. The differences between modern Orthodoxy and the conservative and Reform movements on the left, and modern Orthodoxy and the Orthodox right, lies in how one achieves this goal. Modern Orthodoxy is a hybrid. That's what the term is all about. It's Orthodox, but it's modern. Modern Orthodox is a hybrid of two pillars. On the one hand, the Torah says, at the end of Devarim, She'al avicha v'yagetcha, zikenecha v'yomru lach. Ask your father, and he will tell you. Ask your elders, and they will share it all with you. Ask your parents and elders, and they will tell you. Go back to the past. Ask the previous generation and generations. They'll share information with you. On the other hand, the Torah, in the most important legislative paragraph of all of Chumash, Perek Yud Zayin of Dvarim, says the following. Ki yipalei mimcha davar. If something is too wondrous for you, bein dam ledam, bein din ledin, bein nega lenega. If something is too wondrous for you in the area of capital law, in the area of civil law, in the area of ritual, something comes up in a new generation, ki yipalei, and it's too wondrous for you, and you really don't know how to address it because it doesn't seem to have been specifically addressed in the past. When something is too wondrous, continues the text, Ve'kamta ve'alita el hashofet asher yihye bayamim hahem. You shall rise and go to the judge who will be in your generation. I want you to think about those two psukim. She'al avicha v'yagetcha, zikenecha v'yomulah. It's a statement of past. Ki palei mimcha davar v'kamta ve'alita el hashofet asher yihye bayamim hahem. Go to the judge of your generation. Ask the Midrash, who then am I supposed to go to? A judge who's no longer living, if it's a new matter? Says the Midrash, Yiftach bidoro kishmuel bidoro. Maybe in your generation, they may not be as great as previous generations, but for that generation, that Yiftach is the greatest. That speaks about present into the future. And my sense is, from my travels throughout the country, that people are looking for a Judaism that is rooted in history, in tradition. Yes, I would argue, whether it is an obvious search or a latent search, I believe that people are searching for a halacha which has that anchor, that rootedness, that tradition, that history, in the spirit of She'al avicha v'yagetcha zekenecha v'yomulach, with one proviso. The proviso is that it's not stagnant. In the same breath, people are looking for a fluidity in halacha. El hashofet asher yihye bayamim hahem. Go to the judge of your generation as long as it has clear parameters. I want to repeat that. What I find is that people are looking for a rootedness as long as it's not paralyzing. In the same breath, people are looking for a fluidity, but they don't want an evolving system that has no boundaries and no parameters whatsoever. This, I believe, is the dialectic of Masorah. Built into Masorah is clearly a connection to the past. Clearly, you have built-in She'al avicha v'yagetcha zekenecha v'yom yulach. In Pirkei Avot, it opens up by telling us how Moshe transferred the Torah to Yehoshua. U'misara v'Yehoshua. Now, misara is different than nitana. It could have said u'nitana v'Yehoshua. My sense is that nitana latek means that I give it to someone and it's no longer mine. If I'm giving you something, correct? Hadassah, it's yours. It's no longer mine. But if the verb is misara, that's something different. It means I give it to you, but the receiver is still connected to the giver. So when in Pirkei Avot it says u'misara liYehoshua, that Moshe was moser the Torah to Yehoshua, it meant it was Yehoshua's, but it was still connected to Moshe. She'al avicha v'yagetcha zekenecha v'yomulach. Yehoshua was very much a continuum of Moshe. But built into Masorah is another unit. The term, I believe, also comes from the word Masorah, comes from the word sur. Samach Vav Resh, sur, which is a term which denotes movement. Movement. In the Gemara, Eidei Mesira, Kati. Sur Meira, Sur Moshe is at the sneh. And what does he say? Asura na ve'ereh. It denotes movement. It denotes, I would use this phrase, to step away, to step from, to recognize that one should not be frozen in time. What distinguishes modern Orthodoxy is that its mission to bring ethical monotheism into the world through the Masorah is a dialectic of rootedness, and change. And it achieves this through a halacha which affects change through what I would call progression or interpretation. Let me explain. Let me explain each. Progression is basically Maimonidean. It's basically the view of the Rambam. Rambam argues that the Torah is the ideal. The Torah is the ideal. The Torah is the ideal. The purpose of Torah is Kedoshim to you, to be holy, Banshei Kodesh to you, li, Vasitim Hatov Vayashar. The Torah is the ideal. But we're living in the real world. And the journey from the real world to the ideal world is a very long one. You don't get there all at once. The ultimate ideal is the time of redemption, is the time of Mashiachiyut. Let me give you an example. Consider the Torah Shabbatav's position on polygamy or slavery. Clearly, this is not the ideal, as it flies in the face of every person being created b'tselem Elokim. Tselem Elokim means when I look at you and you look at me, we see what we see, but if we look deeply into each other, do you know what we should see? We should see a little bit of God. And as God is infinite and endless in value, so too every human being has infinite and endless value. So clearly, polygamy, clearly slavery is not the ideal. It's contrary to everything that Tselem Elokim is all about. Still, given the culture of biblical history, polygamy and slavery were tolerated. But in time, Rabbeinu Gershon comes on the scene, and he introduces his takana against polygamy, and slavery is, of course, no longer part of our parlance. It is, in effect, outlawed. Rambam argues the concept of progression in his Moreh Nevuchim, in the guide, in his discussion of sacrifices. There he writes the following, and I quote, "Many things in our law are due to the fact that a sudden transition from one opposite to another is impossible. And man, according to his nature, is not capable of abandoning suddenly all to which he was accustomed." Interpretation is a different approach, even though I think in the end, the theory of progression and interpretation, I think they conflate. But for now, I'm presenting them as separate theories. Interpretation is inherent in the oral tradition, and it is best expressed by the Zohar. The Zohar calls the written law Dina Kasha, and the oral law the Zohar calls Dina Rafia. For the Zohar,